The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 2014 Polyphonic on Campus webinar. Really happy to have you here with us. I'm Steve Yankee from polyphonic.org, and hopefully you can actually see us tonight as well. We're, for the first time, enabling our webcams. This is a new feature of the webinar service, so we're excited to try to make this a little more interactive. We're glad that you're here and joining us with others from around the country for what is our second in a series of 3 webinars this spring. And tonight we're really excited to have a panel of 3 really wonderful speakers from different areas of the country representing 3 very innovative ensembles. We have Ayden Adler from the New World Symphony in Miami, Gavin from Alarmable Sound. Gavin's in Chicago, but Alarmable Sound is sort of everywhere. And Wozniak from Sound Exchange in Rochester, New York. Just a couple of logistics before we begin tonight's presentation. You'll notice that your phone or computer audio is muted by default. That's just so that we don't have a lot of background noise. But we absolutely encourage you to ask questions. And so how you can do that is there's a question box located under the webinar control panel. And you can just type a question in there, then point in the presentation, and look at that and read it at the end of the webinar. And I'll remind you how to do that at the end. But certainly we welcome your questions and look forward to the discussion period at the end. With that, I think I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ayden to start us off.
Thanks so much. Welcome, everybody. It's kind of odd to talk to folks without seeing you, but look forward to hearing your questions. So I wanted to talk a little bit about New World Symphony because we are, in essence, a laboratory for how music is experienced and taught and presented. And with that in mind, I work very hard with the fellows to construct and articulate a curriculum that allows them to skills that we all feel is really necessary for them to be successful as 21st century musicians. So Steve, if you could pull up my first slide. So there are 4 main ideas that run through our curriculum. Excellence, of course. We talk about excellence as being necessary, absolutely, but not yet sufficient, not only not totally sufficient to being a successful 21st century musician. In addition to excellence, we talk a lot about collaboration with your peers in classical music, but especially through the model that Michael Wilson-Thomas sets, we talk a lot about collaboration with other artistic forms, collaboration in a humanistic sense of really understanding the music you're playing within a wider cultural and artistic context. Innovation is one of the hallmarks of the New World Symphony. Everything from the way we think about music, the way we think about presenting music, experiencing music, but also to technology and how that plays a role in the building that we work in, this beautiful, newly built Frank Gehry building, but then also in our concert presentations. And then finally, global citizenry. You know, this idea of the musician as a global citizen is something that is now even more possible than ever through the distance learning technologies that bring us all so much closer together. And so then, given those 4 main values and ideas that sort of run through our curriculum, we split what we teach into 3 main areas: orchestral performance and musicianship, audience engagement, and leadership development. Orchestral performance and musicianship has always been the core of the New World experience. But again, that is not enough to be successful as a leader in this century's classical music field. And so no less important, we feel, is audience engagement and leadership development. And I'll go through all of those in just a moment. So if we can go to the next slide. Thanks. In terms of orchestral performance and musicianship at New World, we have 87 fellows, and those fellows make up one ensemble. That's because orchestral training is at the core. Our full name is the New World Symphony America's Orchestral Academy. Everyone is here because we're very committed to orchestral playing. But in and of itself, that's not everything that we do. And certainly as we train for orchestral playing, it's not necessarily in the same format that you would always imagine. We've done a ton of experimentation around what we call alternate formats. That means playing, like this past weekend we played 6 half-hour concerts that we charged $2.50 for each concert. And we see half of our audience, if not more, is totally new to New World Symphony and totally new to classical music on a lot of occasions. And what we do is we provide a very easily digestible first experience with classical music. And I think this is really important. We use the literacy analogy a lot about how to engage people around classical music. And you would never give a 5-year-old War and Peace, but we do that to our beginner listeners all the time. People will walk into a Mahler symphony and have never heard a single classical concert before. So this past weekend we played Bolero, and then we played the Overture to Tannhäuser. We've also done Scheherazade on these concerts, which is really colorful, wonderful experiences for the first-time listener. We'll also do an hour-long concert that's narrated in terms of the broader cultural and social milieu that the composer was writing in. And certainly we do very composed concerts. So they're very heavily produced, often with video, with, like you see in the picture, having dancers on stage, poets on stage, combination of chamber music and full orchestra, this idea that the concert experience is not just 8 o'clock at night, overture, concerto, and symphony. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the audience engagement aspect of our work. Thanks. So we think of multiple audiences when we prepare programs. We think about our audience in the hall, we think about our audiences in the community, and we think about our audiences in the digital space, and then pay special attention to patron engagement, really teaching our fellows how to engage with the subscribers and the donors that are really the lifeblood of many of our musical endeavors. In the hall, that means not only on the orchestral level, but even on the chamber music level, to incorporate a lot of the ideas that I just spoke about. In the community, that means having proficiency speaking to audiences of all ages, of different ethnicities, and in different levels of understanding of classical music. In the digital space, that means having every fellow, we want them to have a digital footprint. We want them to understand how to create their own website, their own blog, how to use social media to promote themselves and the music that they love. Orchestras, I think, in my vision of the future, it's not an unidentified mass of people sitting in black. This is really, it's a group of individualistic, very interesting people, and I think the more that the audience knows about individuals, the more interested they are in the kind of music that they're making. So if you go to the next slide. Thanks. So finally, our last piece of the puzzle is leadership development. I've divided it into 2 words, one of which you probably recognize, which is entrepreneurship, which is how to build your own organization, which Gavin and Emily will talk about. But we also talk a lot about intrapreneurship, which is if you're going to join an existing orchestra, some of these orchestras have been around for 100, 150 years, how do you play a role in helping bring that orchestra into the 21st century? Our orchestras tend to be incredibly conservative, very traditional, built on an 18th century model that sort of flourished in the 19th century, that isn't as applicable in some of its fundamental experiences that we are looking for in the 21st century. And there's nothing wrong with the music we play, but I think there's always room to look at how it's experienced and how we communicate the value of this music to contemporary audiences. So We talk a lot about soft skills, actually, at New World Symphony. They're called soft skills. These are relationship building. We talk about knowing yourself. We do like Myers-Briggs testing. We talk about how to build relationships. We talk about collaboration. And we talk about influence and how to network and how to bring people around a new idea. A lot of our fellows going into orchestra experiences feel that they have two options. One is that they either put their head down and play really well and don't say anything to anyone. Unfortunately, that feels really inauthentic to a lot of people, especially coming out of the New World experience when they've had so much experimental and innovative experiences. And then at the other end, they sort of envision themselves like moving into the CEO's office of this orchestra and giving them like 20 ideas of how they can make the orchestra better. And that tends to often not be the best strategy for getting someone's attention either. And so what we do is we teach them technique the same as we teach instrumental technique about how to get people around an idea, how to formulate an idea, how to bring around people with you, and then how to influence change. So those are the three pieces. It's your excellence on your instrument, it's audience engagement, really thinking about the formats that are going to be applicable to today's audiences, and then finally leadership development, how do you develop the skills to put forward your ideas and make things happen. So I'll leave it at that and then turn it over to my colleagues.
Okay, so I thought that I would talk a lot, just based on the experience I've had or that we've had in Alarm with Sound, actually building an organization from scratch. A lot of what Ayden said resonates with my experience, and I know with the experience of peers in similar organizations. I think what's interesting, though, is that Ayden is at an orchestral training program, and yet when we started Alarm Sound, we had a kind of moniker. We're a band, not an orchestra. And I think there's a kind of tension there, and a productive tension in our culture around that obviously what New World Symphony is doing is innovating the orchestral model. And whereas what we're doing is we want to think Alarm Sound is providing an alternative to that, but it's probably a little more complicated than that. It's probably a lot of the things that you were saying just a minute ago, Ayden, about effective communication and so on, are things that we run into in Alarm Sound too. So I think I have a feeling that our conversation is going to sort of go between these two poles, between the standard orchestral model and between new models. But I think those are probably connected in an interesting tension, and we hopefully will get some questions that will tease those up. But I can just tell my story, the Alarm Sound story. If you go to the next slide, Alarm Sound is a large ensemble. It's 20 members of the group, mostly musicians. A couple of us are administrators, and we also have on board a staging director. I think the important thing for us in our identity is that we saw ourselves as the kind of the ensemble moderne or the ensemble intercontemporain of America. What we noticed was that every European country had a large ensemble dedicated to new music that tours nationally and internationally, and America didn't. And we took that as a cue to fill that space. What we found out was that there's good reasons that it didn't exist in America, because it's really tricky, it's hard, it's expensive. Yet we knew and we decided early on that we would stick to that identity. And I think that's proven to be successful. One way that is very important for me to measure that success is the fact that of the original members since 2001, 15 of those people have stuck around over the last 13 years, even though it's a very challenging model. The next slide. I think the whole band, not an orchestra thing, or even just the way we've organized ourselves really is about seeing ourselves as an artist-centered organization. That is what actually something that Ayden said a minute ago. We're really a collection of individuals and that it's that individuality coming together around a shared vision that accounts for our success. So the first way of sort of being an artist is that the organization as a whole, the collective as a whole, really is there to foster a rewarding artistic and professional environment for its members. So in the context of Alarm of Sound, when they play an Alarm of Sound concept, or they're helping Alarm of Sound to organize itself, that is actually rewarding in and of itself, but also the organization and working with Alarm of Sound is also a vehicle for them to do interesting things outside of Alarm of Sound, right? And the payoff really is that if the organization does reward its members, it's a home for its members, you see that the membership is maintained. You see that those interpersonal relationships that are absolutely core to a team produce results, right? It comes out of shared vision and a shared mission. And I guess I would add to that second point there on my slide that with a shared vision and a shared mission, you're also sharing risks. And especially if you're coming up with a new model, something that's new, there's a lot of risk-taking that's involved. And that's just better done as a team, right? I think it's also a hallmark of not only Alarm of Sound, but many groups that peer groups of ours and groups that I see starting out now, that the artists are involved in both artistic and organizational decision making. So in Alarm of Sound, the way that works is that all decisions at the group, every time we get together to rehearse, we set aside time for at least an hour and a half of member meeting. And we say everything that's on the table to be discussed, and we get everybody's input for it. And then Alan and I we make decisions as best as we can. And I think overall, these things, the value of this as an artist-centered organization is that for each individual in the group, there is room for growth, individually and as a team. And maybe stretching it just a little bit, there's also room for growth, that growth grows the field as well and grows the culture. Right? I think it's also important that we have had a clearly articulated identity and mission that makes it clear what it is the team is doing together. I think it also is important as performing artists to have an identity as an art ensemble, because what audiences want, I think, at the bottom line is not just the notes. They don't just want the sound-based playing theater. They're actually looking for a relationship. And if you have a clear identity and a clear mission, that is healthy not only for yourself, it's also very productive for the relationship you have with the audience, the relationship that you have with collaborators. It also has other, side effects too, which are positive, namely it's easier to market yourselves with a clear identity and a clear mission. And whenever conflicts arise in the group, as they do and should, you can always come back and say, okay, wait, let's think about our identity and mission, and let's try to solve our conflicts in that context. I ended the last slide there talking about conflict resolution, because I think that a key for artist-centered organizations is the recognition that everybody's going to be involved in making decisions. And one has to be, I think, really thoughtful about how you make decisions. And you can recognize sort of the range of possibilities, right? So autocracy, one person or very few people decide, and that what they say goes. On the opposite end of that spectrum, consensus, everybody has to agree. I think we grew up in this context in modern democratic societies where democracy works really well for decision making. We have found in Alarm of Sound, we've come up with this hybrid, I call it the strong executive model, which is it's not a democracy, but as I indicated before, we get a lot of input from the group. Everybody in the group has a say in organizational decisions and in artistic decisions. Alan and I make the decisions, So it's got something like autocracy in it, except Alan and I have to earn the trust of the ensemble, earn the trust of the group by making good decisions that and the individuals within the team. So I have a feeling that some of the questions that come up may, in the question and answer, may talk about decision-making models, or talk about conflict resolution and how we deal with that, because it is an early growing thing. The next slide actually is about growing pains that I went through, or that you, if you're just thinking about starting your own ensemble, you may run into. You know, the first thing for us was finding opportunities, and you know, it essentially for us meant saying yes to everything for the first 3 or 4 years, and we were careful though to say yes to everything that matched our identity. So not absolutely everything, but some the things that for us, again, we never broke down into smaller ensembles. So we never played string quartets and wind quintets. For us, that was one way of being very strategic about saying yes to opportunities. At the same time, at the beginning, as totally unknown, we had to establish a presence, and we did that by saying yes to everything that suited our identity. I think you'll also, what was true at the beginning and remains true today, is that opportunities arise by continually having conversations within the network and actually expanding that network. Many, if not most, of the opportunities that have arisen for Alarm of Sound have come up in totally unstructured conversations I'm having, you know, with somebody, and just by telling them what we're up to and them telling me what they're up to, it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're doing that? We should collaborate. And then suddenly there's an opportunity there. So those are strategies that we've used at the beginning and have continued to use today. Another growing pain, of course, is this question of sustainability, which is related to funding. And I think it's really important to do stuff in order to establish a track record of feasibility and success. The funding will not be there at the beginning, and for us in Alarm of Sound, we started up by paying ourselves $50 per concert because that was as much money as we could find. But it was just more important for us to be able to say after 2 or 3 years, look, we performed 8 concerts with this attendance, with these reviews, to establish that track record was very, very important. And I'll skip, just in the interest of time, I'll sort of skip down to that the last point on the sustainability and funding, which is to say that a good long-term goal is to be aware that the sustainability is going to be driven a lot by engagement with the community. And that's the community of fellow artists and performing artists, and that relationship with the individuals in your audience. Those are the people that are going to not only be purchasing tickets and donating, but they're actually where the rubber meets the road for performing artists. That's what's going to, in that shared experience of a concert, is what will sustain you, sustain that relationship, sustain our field. Right? And then the last thing I wanted to end with was a bit of counterintuitive advice, perhaps, that comes up with decision making and comes up with just the growing pains of starting an organization, which is just inevitably there is conflict, and my advice is always to embrace that conflict. Avoiding conflict is always destructive. Embracing it is often productive because the source of that conflict is usually a strong sense of mission, that 2 or more people are disagreeing strongly because they care deeply. And if you embrace that conflict and figure out why it is that you're disagreeing, often a third way comes up, and that third way is probably a better solution. And so we found in Alarm of Sound that, especially in the early days when it was really hard, we had lots of different ideas about how to do things, that instead of avoiding conflict and embracing them, we got a lot more done. So yeah, that's my presentation here, and then hopefully we'll have some questions, and I'm happy to go back to our concrete experience of forming Alarm. So.
Great. So Sound Exchange is 2.5 years old, and as the youngest group on this presentation, I think we're in an interesting place because for us, Eastman has served as this experimental lab for us to try new things and, like Gavin said, take risks. And now we're at this point where we actually need an organizational structure that's appropriate and that will support our art. So we're in a growing pain in that sense. But if you go to the next slide, Steve. Thank you. Our startup story is basically I took time off to teach and freelance between my undergrad and grad school, and I think in my undergrad I was so narrowly focused on audition preparation and just winning an audition, taking auditions, that I really had no awareness of what was actually going on outside of my practice room. And I remember when I took time off and actually noticed what was going on in the news, I read about the bankruptcies in orchestras and the challenges that classical music was facing, and I was totally shocked. I was totally stunned that people didn't want to come listen to this music that we all care so much about. So when I started my master's degree at Eastman, next slide, please, I kind of had this burst of energy, and I wanted to be a part of the generation that was going to revolutionize classical music. And that's what I told people, like, we have to change this. We have to make big changes because it's up to us. And I believed in the creativity that I knew was at Eastman, and I just kind of had this energy and drive to start a platform that could enable musicians to take the risks necessary to create transformative concert experiences. That was the primary goal. So we started as, you know, on the left, this orchestra that rehearsed in 120 at Eastman, and our primary goal from the very beginning was to change the perspective that we offer the audience when we play concerts. And so our very first concerts, we had no money, and we also wanted to make sure that we played outside of Eastman because Eastman has a very loyal following in terms of an audience base, but we wanted to go outside of the school. And since we had no money, we just decided to sit the audience in the orchestra, and that was the first thing we were going to do, is actually like physically change their perspective that they were offered when they listened to our music. So we went from kind of thrown together orchestra playing concerts to eventually an ensemble that's producing shows more along the lines of productions in the other photo. And you can go to the next slide, Steve. And our mission, like I said, this whole time was about the experience of the audience member and how we can connect with people and bring them closer to that kind of magical element that we think exists when we play live music. And for us, for me, it was like there must be this major disconnection, because if we love it so much and there's this crazy energy that's basically addictive, why are so many people missing out on that? And what can we do to bring them closer to that? At first it was, let's put them physically closer to it. And then we kind of generated this buzz that we were this group of Eastman students who wanted to try different things. So different collaborators and different venues contacted us, and it's very difficult to transport 50 musicians anywhere. And so we did kind of by nature have to break off and play and perform in smaller groups. So I think that our identity here in Rochester was shaped by obviously the music we play, but the collaborations that we engaged in, the venues we play at, and also our dedication to education. So the next slide. In terms of the music we play, I think it's interesting because there's this natural desire to try to classify what music we play. And we never set out to be just a new music ensemble. We played classical music and new music from the beginning. And our concert here, this was at a bar, and we played contemporary music, and we played music written by the people in our group, and then we played arrangements that members in our group wrote of popular music. So it's a total situation where we're playing all of the above, and we are kind of figuring out how to put it together programmatically in a way that makes sense. But what it comes down to is that we play music we believe in, and what I think is great about forming your own group, like Gavin mentioned, you form relationships with your friends and your colleagues, and so you not only believe in this music, but you believe in each other and encourage each other to try new things. So, you know, when my friends write music, I want to invest in them, and I think we develop this kind of energy together that's really fun to be a part of, and we try to bring the audience as close to that as we can. So I think the music, it's really what we believe in, and that sometimes varies from venue to venue or from collaboration to collaboration. But I think it embodies this sense of exploration that's really a lot of fun. And the next slide. So in terms of collaborations, I think this has been one of the most formative things because the people we've collaborated with, we've basically had to learn a new language. I've never worked with dancers. I've never worked with visual artists or a lighting designer or people who are in technology and computer science. So every time we've done a project that involves an outside collaborator, you learn a new language and you add a new element to the concert experience that really you didn't think was possible before. So this, what's pictured here is a concert we designed for the Fringe Festival in September, and it was titled Anomaly, and it was staged in a planetarium, so a 4-dome planetarium, and it involved modern dance and a multimedia artist. So we designed this as, you know, a seamless show that went from beginning to end with a narrative thread where the music and the dance and the multimedia was interlaced. And in that case, the venue was a collaborator because it was this huge dome. So the dancers actually figured out a way to go behind the screen of the planetarium. We really figured out ways to embrace the entirety of the space, which was really fun. And then the next slide. And so building off that theme of venues, it's just been so much fun because the venues challenge us to try new things. The picture on the right, I was telling Gavin and Steve, is at Artisan Works here in Rochester, and this is a huge, huge old warehouse that they've transformed into a house for just millions of pieces of art. So this is in their banquet hall where they have concerts and wedding receptions, but they also have probably like 20 to 25 different smaller rooms that are themed. So there's a Marilyn Monroe room, there's all these different rooms with different types of themed art. So we were asked if we wanted to do a concert there, and we said, yeah, but how do we embrace an entire warehouse? And one of the people on our team said, you know what, I want to build interactive musical installations to go in all the different rooms. So people come to the venue, they'll spend an hour going through and exploring the space and interacting with the musicians who are playing different things in different spaces, and then they'll come sit down for this concert in this hall. And I had no idea this colleague could do that. And so that venue really brought out a different creative side of that musician. And then the other one is in the Memorial Art Gallery here in Rochester, and we had students write pieces that went specifically with different pieces of art. And so I think the venues have really, really pushed us to try new things. Next one, Steve. And so besides the music, the collaborations, the venues, we from the beginning have had really strong dedication to education. And for me, I think in college I spent a lot of time doing quote unquote outreach, where you go to a school or a community venue once. You say, I'm a horn player, so you say, you know, my horn is 15 feet long. When you unwind all the tubes, here's the cool piece I'm playing, and then you leave. And so it's in a way temporary entertainment, and it's kind of musician-centered. This is what I do, and it's cool. But we wanted to find a way to make our education curriculum student-centered. So we wrote a grant and partnered with a general music classroom in the photo to the left for an entire semester, and did 7 visits to their class. And before that started, we sat down with the classroom teacher over and over and over and did a total analysis of what her lesson plans were for the entire semester, so we could understand her learning objectives and figure out how we could serve as a tool for her to enhance her classroom experience. And what we wanted to do was find a way to have a sustained impact on the kids' learning, not just show up once. And so we structured it as a research project and videotaped all of the sessions with the kids. And sorry, I hear a sound, but I guess it's okay. And so we also collected feedback from the students, the teacher, and the musicians after every visit. So we structured this partnership as a research project so that we can figure out how to build an effective curriculum that partners a public school classroom and a performing ensemble. Next one. And then finally, for our upcoming projects, I said earlier that we're at the point where we need a model and we need a structure that's going to support what we do. And we recently got a major grant to partner with Rochester Institute of Technology and Microsoft Studios and some educational institutions here in Rochester. And this is something that it's bigger than we ever imagined we would ever be handed. And so artistically, it's designing a 4-concert series and 4 educational different partnerships, and figuring out a way to incorporate interactive technology into the concert experience, which we've tried, but I think that's something that's a collaboration that could be done really, really poorly. And so we hope to figure out a way to work really closely with our collaborators to design concerts that basically build a network where the audience can connect to the musicians all on mobile devices or have some kind of access to mobile devices and a visual component, and figure out a way to open up a communication network that ties in to the concert experience. So we're in the phase where we're testing this out. The venue here is at Rochester Institute of Technology, and so we have 9 different projectors to work with and 6 walls. And so this is another instance where the venue is a major factor in the concert that we're going to design. And like Gavin said, even in 2.5 years, there are lots of growing pains and a lot of stuff that's hard to figure out, because you kind of feel like you're building a plane while you're flying it. And I went to school for horn performance, and writing grants, managing the finances, all of this stuff, it's brand new, but I think the creativity that starting your own ensemble gives musicians it's so much fun. And as Gavin said too, you build this trust and this willingness to take risks with your fellow musicians and your friends. And it's just been a great experience.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Emily. And I want to thank Gavin and Ayden as well for sharing their thoughts. It's really interesting to sort of see all the different perspectives they bring and how they overlap, how they differ, and definitely really interesting. I want to remind people how to ask questions real quick. We're hoping that you have some questions we can sort of discuss with everyone. I'm just going to navigate for a second and pull them up here. There's a question box on your webinar control panel. You can have a question right in there, send it in to us, and we will hopefully be able to discuss it and shed some light. So let me see what we have here. The question is here for Ayden. Says, how do you measure the success of your efforts?
Was that the whole question?
That's it.
Okay. Well, there's different ways to measure success, and I'm not sure in terms of what element of what I was talking about the question refers to, but certainly we measure success in terms of the quality of musical life of our alumni. And we measure success in terms of the impact we have on the orchestral field. And in both those areas, it's been really interesting to hear back from alumni who are speaking a language very similar to Gavin and Emily within the orchestral field, that they are looking to New World and grateful for New World for the skills that they got there, because it did hit, our skill sets that we teach do hit on a lot of the elements that you guys were both talking about, both with the grant writing and the reading financials and understanding sort of the structure of these institutions, nonprofit performance institutions, but then also the creativity and the innovative side of thinking outside the box. And I love what Emily said about thinking about the audience experience, because that's something that we talk about all the time at New World as well. And that's just a fundamental switch of mentality from musicians having a very small definition of what their role is, whether in an orchestra or whether in society at large, to have a much broader expectation of themselves to make an impact. And so what we are seeing among our alumni is much more quality of life in general, because they tend to be more fulfilled, more curious, more energetic, accomplishing things outside, not only in their orchestras, but outside of that in the community. And we also see, for example, Kansas City Symphony, a third of the musicians in that symphony are New World alum. And that symphony is doing very well in terms of labor relations, in terms of the musicians being a real part of the solution in how that orchestra moves forward, and in terms of financial stability. So I guess in terms of those kind of results, we're seeing that among the alumni. And then in terms of the impact that we have in terms of the experimental concerts that I was talking about, that's been very interesting too. We've been working with Wolf Brown, which is a data analysis firm that's helping us understand impacts that we're making ourselves from these experimental programs. And one of the things that we're most proud of is that we are engaging so many newcomers to classical music around the art form, and we're seeing a very high return rate in these kind of programs. We're also seeing, we asked an interesting question, which is about impact and aesthetic connection. And we're finding that it doesn't necessarily need to be 2 hours for people to have a really amazing, impactful, memorable artistic experience. And so we're seeing these results, and so we're becoming more flexible in how we create concerts, and we're providing a lot for other orchestras. There's a coalition now, about 10 orchestras that are working with us using the data from the alternate formats, and that stuff has been published over the summer, and I'm happy to, if that's a question that anybody is curious about, I'm happy to share that information.
Great. Yeah, I think I remember seeing recently that program was profiled in Symphony magazine. Is that right?
Yeah, that whole project was, yeah.
Yeah. Another question here, this is for Gavin and Emily, and it says, how do you engage musical members in your collective to become strategically engaged and structural stakeholders?
Well, one thing I like to remind people that we have a little saying in Along the Sun. I'm the guy that signs the checks, and so people often, at the beginning especially, it was clear that we're thinking that it was my money, and so we developed this thing. It's not my money, it's our money. That, I think, embedded in the question and also embedded in the it's not my money, it's our money, is this notion of stakeholders. And everybody ought to feel like they have a stake. Again, I think our decision-making model takes that into, or makes that the culture in Ensemble Sound. Like I said, in terms of our practice, we always have a group meeting every time we get together for rehearsal. So for a typical Ensemble Sound production looks like this. People flying from wherever they are, they're all spread out all over the country. So I have people as far west as San Francisco, as south as South Carolina, as far north as Montreal. Only 5 people live in one place, which is New York City, but the other 15 people are spread out all over the country. We fly in 3 days before the concert. We rehearse for 3 days, and then we put the concert or the concerts on. In that time, in those 3 days, we always reserve at least an hour and a half for discussion of decisions that are facing us, and everybody has input. We also have online mechanisms. If Google decided to start charging for its products, we would be bankrupted, because everything we do has an online architecture, online infrastructure to facilitate people being involved and knowing what's going on. And so we run the group with a lot of transparency and a lot of input. And I think the result is that people feel ownership. Again, even though Alan and I are the ones that are making the decision, if we don't make decisions that people feel serve them as individuals to serve the team, then Alan and I are in trouble. The positive way to put that is as long as Alan and I are making decisions that that serve everyone and serve the team, then people feel part of the team and they do take a stake. Another important way in which we, I think, the sense of ownership is that we shared the risk right from the beginning. So I think, as I mentioned in our story, we paid ourselves $50 a concert at the beginning, and we knew those were practically slave wages. But what it meant was that we all realized we were making an investment of our time and the value of our labor into the long-term success of the group. So I think that's probably one reason, both from a labor perspective and just a psychological perspective, why 15 of the original 20 members have stuck around, because they really invested themselves in the beginning of the group. So off the top of my head, those are the things that I think the kinds of things that we did that and continue to do that have this, have everybody be stakeholders in the project.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the challenges we've faced too is that with people being in school and a master's degree is 2 years, people leave pretty frequently. But right now we have a really tight core of 7 people, and I think in terms of ownership, 1 month we might have 2 main projects, and so the people in our group really get to take a leadership role in the artistic design of some of our programs. And so I see it, I think they see it too, as an investment in their own art and in their own career, because they're designing this stuff from scratch, and they're recognized for it. And they're getting to be part of a platform where they can write their own music and have it programmed. And so I think that sense of community and trust is something that people want to invest in. And for us too, after the first year of doing everything for free, I always felt like even if Sound Exchange existed for 2 years, I want to have the financial challenges too, because that's the reality, is that you can have an endless amount of creative ideas, but if you can't fund them, there is always a way, but you'll reach a wall. So I always wanted to deal with the funding piece, and so our second year we had money that we had raised, and we started at $50 too. But I think being transparent about that for us as musicians still in school, people will see a big number for a grant that we got, but a big grant pays for musicians, it pays for the venue. It pays for the technology required for the project, and so the expenses add up so quickly that I think, like Gavin said, being very transparent about that is important too, because a lot of people just see a big number. But I really think it's about the artistic ownership, and I think for us, I made a lot of artistic decisions early on because it was more efficient to have 1 or 2 people do it, but as soon as more people were brought into that process, I felt like the level at which the group performed was dramatically different. So I think you have to open the door for people to have creativity and have a leadership role if they want one.
Awesome, thanks. Next question says this for everyone. It's something that Emily talked a little bit about, which is, what do you envision the role of audience participation to be in the future of alternative classical music venues?
I have a perspective on that, which is, so if people may be familiar with this venue in New York City, Le Poisson Rouge, which is maybe about 5 or 6, just over 5 years old now, I think, and it's essentially a bar that plays classical and independent music, and it at the time really created a splash simply by virtue of the fact that it wasn't a concert hall and classical music was being played there. That kind of thing is happening a lot more now. In fact, in St. Louis in 2 weeks, we're going to go play at a rock club called the Pageant, which is where it's sort of the premier place in St. Louis that touring rock bands go to. And places like the Poisson Rouge, or for me to make the decision to play in the pageant in St. Louis, I think comes from the recognition that concert halls as venues grew up for very particular reasons. You know, the stage here, the row of chairs there, the acoustics of the hall in a certain way. And they serve music and certain kinds of music in a very good way, but at the same time, they kind of house a history, and they house certain etiquette behavior. People talk about it too, about, you know, we can't clap between performance, between movements and so on. And I think those are real, those are things for us to think about in terms of the entire experience that an audience has. So an example, I think, of just doing something innovative and something new is to literally change the architecture of our performances, to use alternative venues. And you'd be surprised what a difference it makes when the audience is not sitting in rows and you're not up on the stage. I mean, Emily showed an example of that, and it was like that was a very important thing for her too. So that's one concrete way I think that we can start engaging with audiences in a different way, not from the not sort of across the proscenium from on high on the stage to them seated in pews, but actually in different configurations. Because I think that speaks to a larger question of how we can be creative about the audience experience, put ourselves in their shoes, and see, well, what are the different ways that we can present our music to them.
Yeah, and I think too, going off of what Gavin said, I don't think we've played in a traditional concert hall yet. We purposely avoided that at the beginning, which posed a lot of challenges, a lot of acoustical challenges, a lot of challenges that I think sometimes I felt took away from our focus on trying to play at the highest level possible, because different venues are very challenging. But I think once you build that trust within your ensemble where the group is willing to go to different places and they adapt really quickly, it's a lot of fun, but it's definitely an adjustment. And I think audience participation can be taken very literally too. There are several composers at Eastman who have written pieces that solicit audience participation, either to create different sounds or, like I mentioned at that Artists & Works venue, specific installations where audience can go up and interact and be a part of the creative experience. And the apps that we're trying to build with the Rochester Institute of Technology will enable the audience to participate through their mobile device. Again, I think that's a tricky thing that can be done well, and it can be done poorly too. You don't want an audience just looking at their phone during a concert too, but I think making space to play around with the different options is really fun, and hopefully, you know, you do sometimes fail, but if you continue to try new things, you find some things that do work really well.
I just want to jump in with a historical perspective, because I think one of the most sad things about classical music in the 20th century has been the lack of sustaining a connection between the audiences and the musicians. And, you know, like Gavin said, these concert halls and our traditions in the concert hall have stemmed from very specific 19th century cultural traditions and expectations. And we're in a very different world, and people now, they want to be really part of the process. I think one of the reasons that the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts have been so successful has been for the opportunity for people to really see behind the scenes. I think classical musicians, we've really been trained to work very hard and to sweat and to cry, and all of this stuff happens in private. And then we come on stage and we play this beautifully polished performance, and we expect, you know, to be adored and you know, a lot of clapping and applause and everything for the effort. It's a little like ice skating at the Olympics. But there's a lot that goes into that, and I think that people will respect and understand and feel a lot more connected with the music we make if we're willing to show them the process and really take them in to what we value about this kind of music and kind of move away from some of the more traditional expectations on both sides of the audience and the performer.
Another thing we're doing in Alarm of Sound is relying less and less on program notes and actually engaging with the audience in the concert itself. Somebody should study the history of program notes and how they ended up being textbooks at concerts. I just don't get. So, you know, to me, you know, the whole concept, you show up, you're sitting in something that looks already like a classroom, and you get this 50-page book, which is essentially like a textbook, and you're supposed to read it, and it tells you how it goes, how you're supposed to. That's just like, we're doing that less and less in Alarm of Sound. I mean, people want to know things, and I think actually we have the advantage these days of the internet. You can give them, and that information is out there. What that allows you to do, I think, as in terms of relating to your audience, to actually concentrate on the experience and that performing arts experience. So in terms of relating to the audience, one of the things that we do is we cut program notes to almost nothing and instead talk from stage to the audience, give them a little bit of what Ayden was just talking about, to have them have a sense of what it is like for us to make this music, and to invite them and to actually recognize that the audience plays at least half the role in making the music as well. They have to understand and hear it, and to encourage them to do that by engaging with them person to person in the whole music making process. And banning program notes, that's my next mission. Getting rid of program notes.
I think I totally agree, Gavin, with what you're saying, and I think there's another aspect that we've lost out of the classical music tradition, which is improvisation, which is of course connected to composition, which I know, Emily, you've been talking about a lot. But the skill set that you need to speak naturally from the stage, directly without notes to an audience, is something that most classical musicians are very uncomfortable with because we're in such a text-driven field. And this idea of being spontaneous and reading the audience and feeling the moment is something that's very scary for people, and I think we have to get over it, and we have to build the skills so that we can really bring that improvisatory element into the performance so that it doesn't feel so sterile and separated from the audience experience.
That's a great point. That just makes me think, Ayden, do you find that, and maybe all three of you can say this, but do you find that the musicians that come into your organizations, are they prepared to do that in any way, or, you know, from a scale of 1 to 10, are they prepared to do that sort of thing?
At New World, we actually, in our audition process, in addition to playing, people have to write essays and they have to speak. We don't expect people to be perfect at the audition, but we expect them to have something important that they want to communicate and a passion for what they do. And if they can show that in the audition, then we provide them the skills at New World to build the capacity to be able to show that, you know, more and more eloquently through their time in the program.
I would say for us in the first year when I worked with a larger body of musicians, I did have a couple people say, I don't speak at concerts, I don't do that. And so that was surprising to hear people say, I just don't do that. But again, I think like Ayden said, it's not part of the training in school. Your voice is your instrument, and you get very good at using your instrument as your voice. But I would say now with the 7 core people we have, everybody is very comfortable doing that because they're comfortable trying things that are way riskier than speaking. But they're able to learn those skills. I mean, I wasn't good at it at first, and I still struggle sometimes too, but when you get to test it out in a supportive environment, I think you just get better and better.
And there are other things too, I think, that seem really shallow and small, but that actually can make a big difference. In Alarm of Sound, for example, one thing we decided at the very beginning is that the second row of our ensemble, which is the winds and brass, stand. They don't sit. That seems like a really small thing, but what that did was they were physically, it allowed them to physically communicate and for the audience to physically see the joy that people have in making music or how they were moving with the music. No, that's an example. It's not about getting up and speaking, and for people in our group, not everybody in our group talks to the audience, but absolutely everyone in our group, I want to make them be able to communicate as fully as possible with the audience. And so we, there are two small, quote-unquote, shallow things we did. One is that the second row stands, and the other thing is that we said never wear all black. All black as the new music uniform said exactly the wrong thing. It said that you were the performer is invisible. What matters is the notes. What matters is on the music stand. And I wanted our players to say, actually, what matters is I, as an artist, me, and the people in this group. And we're not going to be invisible. We're not going to disappear into a blackout. And so, again, on the surface, it seems like making a decision about what you wear on stage is a shallow thing, but it actually can communicate very powerfully with the audience.
Okay, well, we're right at the 9 o'clock mark, and we try to keep it to an hour, so I want to take this opportunity to thank our three panelists, Gavin, Chuck, Emily Wozniak, Ayden, Adler, for sharing their time and expertise with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. I think this has been a really interesting discussion and some really good ideas and history of these organizations and kind of where they're going. So hopefully we'll get the chance to check in with you again and see, you know, in a little bit more time, you look back and think, you know, where have you gone from here? And it should be really interesting. So if you guys out there have additional questions that we haven't gotten to or you think of later, feel free to email us at info@polyphonic.org, and we will absolutely connect you with these presenters and get your questions answered. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to share it with friends or colleagues or come back to it to review later, you'll find it very soon on polyphonic.org. And hopefully you can join us for our next webinar, which is actually about public speaking for musicians. So how's that for a connection? It's going to be next month, so check polyphonic.org for that. It should be another great webinar. And again, thanks to our presenters for taking the time to be with us tonight. And
thank you. And thanks to Eastman for having us.
Yeah, of course. So everyone have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.